In this video, we're going to be building a like button with PHP. So you can see here that I've got a few test articles. Now these can be absolutely anything. They could be people, they could be statuses, they could be articles. So I have a like button here, and I also have a little piece of text that just gives me a count of how many people have liked this. Now I've tried to make this as easy as possible to integrate into a current project if you need to do this. Let's take a quick look at the database just before we click like on this. So I've got two users. Now I'm faking a user sign in just by starting PHP sessions and then adding a ID, so 1 or 2, to a session key. But we'll look at that in just a moment. I've then got my list of articles, which, as I said, can be absolutely anything. And I've got a table which specifically relates to a user liking articles. The reason we're storing these separately is because then you can maybe store a date and time along with it. You can keep track of the actual users who have liked something. Otherwise, if we just had a, say, like column in here like so, you wouldn't really be able to keep track of each record. So that's how it's going to work. I'm currently faking being signed in as user 1. You can see I'm just starting sessions here, and I'm assuming I'm a signed in user, and I'm at the user ID key. If you don't know what this means, don't worry, we'll be covering this. So over here then, I'm logged in as the user Alex, so when I hit like, you can see it now says 1 people like this. I know the grammar is a little off, but you can go ahead and correct that yourself. And then it gives me a list of the people that have liked this. So what we can in fact do is go ahead and change this to a user 2, which is Billy, and we can go back and we can like this as well. And we can keep clicking like if we really want, but we can't like it more than once. Obviously, that sort of goes without saying. And we can like these other items as well. Now we do have a little bit more protection in here, so if we just copy this link address and paste it in, you can see this is how we actually like things. We have a like.php and we can say type of article. This makes it really easy for you to integrate into other things. You might have, say, articles and statuses. You might want both to be liked. And this ID is the ID of the actual item. So this is article 1, article 2, article 3. I'm going to enter article 999 because obviously some idiots might try and do this. That will actually not work, so there's protection against that as well. If we just refresh in the article likes table over on content, you can see that that hasn't been inserted, but we've got the actual records been inserted here. So it's fairly straightforward to build. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we're going to start completely from scratch. So at the moment you can see we're looking at my database graphical user interface. I'm just going to create the tables that we've already just seen a moment ago. So I'm going to create a users table, and let's go ahead and give the user a username, and let's add this as a varchar. If you are following along with this tutorial from scratch, you can go ahead and add these fields to this users table, and we'll leave it at that because all we really need at the moment to identify a user is a username. So let's create the articles table, and of course if you have something else you want to store, you can change this. And let's give this a title, and again this will be a varchar, and that will be 200, say. Can be different. So now we need the actual table for the likes to happen or to be stored. So I'm going to call this articles likes. Now inside of here we're going to be storing the user and the article. So a user can like an article, and these are stored as integers because these are basically going to be stored, say if we just enter, I don't know, Alex in here, and we enter Billy in here, and for the articles let's add test article 1, and let's add test article 2, and just do one more, so test article 3. So back to the articles likes table. The user then, say user 1, which is Alex, liked article 1, which is test article 1. That's how it would be stored. And the reason we do this is so we don't have to duplicate data. The relationship between these tables is as follows. When a user likes an article, we store a user in there. So a user can like many articles. An article can be liked many times. And this article likes table handles that. So it's fairly straightforward. There's nothing too difficult about this. It just means that you've got more flexibility within the system. So now let's take a look at actually building the ability to output these articles, which is fairly simple. And then we'll go on to actually being able to like them. So in my browser, and certainly within my text editor, there's no code at all here, but I've created a basic structure. Within this app folder, within the root directory I'm working in, I've got an initialization file. And this is really just a test file. You probably wouldn't want to structure your application like this, but this is just to connect to the database, log the user in essentially, and we're doing fake user logins. So let's start to quickly build up this page. We're going to start sessions so we can make use of the session super global, and let's store this in a user ID key, and I'm just going to set this to 1. Now, really important thing at this point is I'm casting this to an integer, which is unnecessary because it's a hard-coded value, but we're going to be using this value inside of a query. And I'm not going to be using prepared statements because it's a little bit too advanced for this tutorial. If you know prepared statements, that's fine, but not everyone will do. So instead of messing around with prepared statements, we're just going to be putting this into a query. But make sure you're sanitizing the data before this goes into a query. Really, really important. We'll be doing so with the article ID as well. So the reason I'm casting this to an integer is if you are storing this value, make sure it is, or use prepared statements if you know. So the next thing really to do is create a database variable and create a new MySQLi instance. And this will basically allow us to connect to localhost, which is my MySQL server address, and use my username, my password, and there we go, my database name. So this database name, you can see up here, website, I've just called it. So this is now available to us whenever we include it in either file. Let's get started on the index now. So I'm going to require this in. So app init.php. So now we have access to the database variable. So I'm going to create a variable here called articles query, and this is going to be db and the query method. And in here I'm going to create a query. This is eventually going to get a pretty long, about 10 lines or so. So initially we want to make this pretty simple. We want to say select articles.id and articles.title. Now the reason I'm using the table name is because later we're going to be doing joins, so we need to specifically define which table this is coming from. You might be used to seeing article ID, select ID title like so. This just means which table it's coming from. So from articles, we know that the table is called articles, and we are going to, I think that's it really for now. That should be it. So I'm going to create a quick while loop down here, and for each loop of this, we're going to fetch the object from this result set. So for each articles query, and then we're going to use the fetch underscore object method, we are then going to assign, or not assign, or add this row to this articles variable here, which you haven't declared up here, but it doesn't matter too much. So now if we just do an echo, we're going to do an echo and we're going to wrap print r in pre-tags, and this will basically just let us see what's inside of this articles array. So doing this then, let's take a look. There we go. So we've now got an array with objects because we did a fetch object, and we've got test article 1, 2, and 3. So that's the first step. We're outputting the actual articles themselves. Let's just comment this out. We'll use it for later. It's really, really useful to have this sort of on hand. So down here then, let's create an HTML5 doc type. Or a document. You don't really have to do this. Really, it's entirely up to you. I'm just going to say articles. And now in the body, we want to output these. So we're going to assume that this articles variable exists. You might want to do a couple of checks. So we're going to say for each articles as article. We're going to come down here and we're going to end this for each. And PHP templating is very messy, but it's a little bit cleaner than outputting PHP within HTML within PHP. So I'm just going to create a div element here with the class of article. I have no styling whatsoever. This is just literally to mark it up how you might mark it up. You've probably already got your markup ready. So here we'll open and close a PHP tag and we'll echo the article title. So let's just quickly preview this. There we go. Let's quickly view the source, and you can see here that we've got our document layout, and we've got a div, the class of article, the header 3 in there. Now what we want is underneath this, we want a link. So an anchor, and within this anchor we want to say like. So the href is obviously the link that this goes through to. So we're going to say like.php. We're going to say type equals, and we can hard code this to article. And then in the query string, we're going to add the ID. So when we go through to like.php, this is essentially going to say, what type is this? It's an article. We'll put a switch in there to check. And then the ID is the actual ID of the record. So in this case, this is dynamic. So we can echo out article ID. So let's just quickly preview that. There we go. So when I click like, that goes through to like.php, type article and ID of 1. And then for article 2 and subsequently, the IDs will change. So now that that's done, what we can actually do is down here, we can output how many people have liked this. So we can do this really, but it's a little bit difficult because we haven't actually created the like functionality. So let's just mark this up just so we know what we're doing, and then later on we'll come in and fill the gaps. So we'll create a paragraph element here and we'll say X people like this. So not very useful at the moment. And in here, let's create an unordered list, and we will create a list item. And in here, I'll just put Alex. But in reality, this will then be a list of the people that have liked them or this article. You don't have to have this in a list. You might not even want to use this. You might want to have it so when someone clicks on X people or 3 people or however many it is, then it pops up with these. It's entirely up to you. But at least you know how to do it, so you can change it if you need to. Okay, so that's all we're really going to do on this page for now. We want to focus on the actual like functionality first. So this is going to be a pure PHP page. We're not going to have any markup in here. We obviously need to access our database because we're going to need to store some records. So app init.php, let's include that in. And let's do a quick check to see if we have inside of the get superglobal the type, first of all, and second of all, the ID. So this will be the type, what can be article, blog post, whatever you're storing. And if you just have one type, then you can omit this altogether, to be honest. So the type here is going to be get type, and down here we're going to have ID like so. So let's just, there we go. So remember, as I said with the session or the user ID, we want to store these, put these into a query. So I'm going to cast this to an integer. We always know that an ID is going to be a number, it's going to be a whole number, so we can just cast it to an int. If you're inserting string data here, use prepared statements. Go and look it up. Use prepared statements. You might want to use PDO for that. It's a little bit easier. But in here, in this case, we're just inserting an ID or 2 IDs, the session and the article ID or whatever. So that's really important. So we're going to do a switch quickly. It's entirely up to you if you use a switch or not. It just seems more appropriate for this. And we're going to switch on the type. So in case this is an article, which in our case it is, we're going to do something in here and we'll break. So here we'll just say echo out OK, just so we know that this works. So hit like OK, hit like OK. Obviously, if one of these is missing, you wouldn't get that. So, or if article was, I don't know, blog, then it wouldn't come up because we haven't got a case for it. But now we are in the position where we can actually insert this data. Now we need to think how this needs to work. We're only going to do one query, and this is going to be quite a long query. The reason I'm doing one query is we'll cut down on the number of queries that we make to the database. We could, for example, let's just bring up SQL Pro. We could do a query to say, does this article exist? Because we need to know that the article exists before we add it into here as a record. We also need to know if the user has previously liked this article or not. So that's really important. We could do another query for that. And then finally, we could do a third query to say, insert this like. However, that means 3 requests to your server already sort of, it's going to have an impact on performance. Now, this query probably could be better optimized. I've just created it in terms of, how easy it is sort of to look at, but there probably are better ways to write this query, but at least it's all in one query. We know that. So let's just do a query. And again, this is going to be quite long, so let's pull it down so we can do multiple lines. And I'll try my best to explain how this all works. So we're obviously going to insert into the articles likes table. That's obvious. And the fields that we want to insert are user and article. So that's user and article here. Now, this is a little bit tricky. What we're doing now is we're selecting data. Now, I've indented it because it's not necessarily related to insert into. It sort of is, but it just helps with readability. Now, I'm going to select two pieces of data from the articles table. That might seem a little bit confusing, and there probably is a better way to do this. But I'm going to select session user ID, and I'm going to select the ID here. So this and this. So I'm saying I want to insert this into here and this into here pretty much. But because we're doing a select from articles, that means that we can then say, do a couple of subqueries that will then check where if certain things exist. So here I'm going to say where exists, and then I'm going to do my brackets and just pull that down. And in here is our subquery. So now we can do an entirely different query. And what exists does, or not exists, which we'll be doing in a moment, it will basically check if any results are returned from this subquery. So in this case, we're going to select ID. And by the way, this is the check to see if the article actually exists, first of all. So we're going to select ID from articles where ID equals the ID of the article that we've submitted through into this page. So let's pull this bracket up there. So what this will do is it will insert using this data, but only where this actual article that's been submitted exists. And when not exists, now this is the part where we're focusing on whether or not there has been a record for the user. Say it's user 1, we'll just insert it for an example. So it's user 1 and article 2. If user 1 and article 2 is being submitted for a second time, it does exist in this table. So we don't want to allow it to be inserted again, because then a user can like more than one thing more than once. So we do another subquery. We say select ID, and we say from articles likes, which is the table we're inserting into, where user equals $_session user ID, and article equals ID. And let's just bring this up. And it's important we do a limit as well, just in case more than one record is returned. So here, let's do a limit of 1. Okay, so let's just run through this just in case this is a little bit confusing. We're inserting the user and article. We know that. We're inserting it with this data, the user ID that the user is logged in, and the ID that we've submitted through when the user has clicked like. Now, what we're also checking is if the article on another table, so we're doing a subquery to handle that, exists, and where not exists, so this query should return 0 rows, which it should if the user hasn't already liked it. So we're selecting the ID from art, and this really doesn't matter which field you select, as long as you select one field. You can even do a select star, but probably a little bit performance heavy. So from articles liked, where the user is the current user logged in, and the article is the article being liked. So this then prevents articles that don't exist being added and users that have already liked the same article. So then after we've all done that, let's just do a header down here. You probably have a better way of handling this within your application, but we're going to locate to index.php, which is basically our list of articles. So at the moment, remember X we haven't done anything with, and this doesn't do anything. So when we hit like, that's redirected us back. It was very quick. We are going to check out SQL Pro. We're going to give that a refresh, and there we go. User 1 has liked article 1. I know that I'm logged in as user 1 here, and I know that I just liked article 1, so it seems to be okay. So now let's try and like this again. Click and head back to SQL Pro and refresh, and you can see that it's still there. There's no records being inserted. Let's now copy this link address, paste this in, and do something like article 99999 or whatever, and let's head over to SQL Pro, refresh, and there we go. So we've handled that. We can't insert twice, and we can't insert where an article does not exist. Cool. So now what we want to do is focus on the index file, and we want to make this query a little bit better to handle the list of users who have liked something and the count of users who have liked something. So I'm just going to pull this down a little bit because it's going to make it very much easier to read. So we want to select articles ID, we want to select articles title. Now we want to use the count function within MySQL to count the amount of likes. So it's articles likes dot, and we'll count on ID. I'm going to call that likes. Let's just capitalize that. So this is now the field name that will be returned. Now at the moment, let's just do a print R and kill the rest of the page there. You'll see that we get an error. And the reason that we get an error is because we're not joining. The query doesn't know where this is sort of coming from, really. So we're selecting from articles, but what we now want to do is do a left join. And we do a left join because articles will always exist, but likes might not exist. So we want to pull all the articles, we want to pull all articles regardless of whether they have been liked. So if it was the opposite way around, we'd do a right join, or if it was both ways, we'd do an inner join, but we're not going to be focusing on them. So we're going to left join on the articles likes table, and we need to choose the fields that these relate to now. So on an article, you have an ID. On an article like, you have an article here which relates to that ID. So we say on articles.id, where that matches articles likes.articles, or it could be article.id. You can name it either way. Depends on how you set your database up. Okay, so let's take a look at this now. The query should no longer fail. And you can see that on article 1, we've got 1 likes, but you may have just noticed that we've only got 1 record coming through here. That's really annoying. And we need to group by a certain field to remedy this. And the way this works is at the moment, we only have 1 result on the other table. So it's just saying, oh, just, pull back 1 result. So what we want to do is we want to say, well, hold on, no, we want to group by the ID. Remember, this is a unique field on our articles table, and articles is the thing we want to list. So we want to group by that. And then, let's just have a look here. Oh, articles.id, and that will give us 3 records. And you can see here we've got 1 like on our first article and 0 and 0 on our second and third. Let's give one of the others a quick like, just so we can test this out. So I'm going to like the second one, and there we go. We get a count of 1 on that second one as well. Okay, so this is all well and good. Let's quickly head over to init.php, change my user ID to 2, which is the Billy record in my database just here. And let's try and like that as well. So let's like maybe article 3 and article 2. So now we've got 2 likes on the second article and 1 like on the third article. Cool. So now we're going to pull through the actual users. Actually, we'll keep that where it is, but we'll kill the page there. So we want to pull through the actual users that have liked this. Now, there are tons of ways to do this. One of the ways would be to query in a loop, which wouldn't be good practice. Sorry, it would be bad practice. So what we want to do is, firstly, we need to actually pull in the users. So we're going to do a left join. Again, the articles exist, doesn't necessarily have to be associated with the user. So we're going to left join the users table, and we're going to join on the fact that the articles likes.user equals the users.id field. So remember, we have user, 1 is Alex, 2 is Billy. Cool, so that's not really made a difference to our query because we're not altering how we select things. Now what I could do is I could say, well, I want to select users.username, but let's take a look at how this is gonna turn out. You can see here that we've got Alex, and Billy, but this isn't very useful because really it's just giving us probably it'll be giving us the first user that liked it. It's probably ordering it by ID, I think, by default. So we need a list here rather than a single record or a single string. So we use a group, the group concat function. Concat stands for concatenate, and group is grouping something. So we want to group users.username, that's what we're interested in, and we want to define what separator we want to use. In fact, this should probably be capitals. So the separator I'm going to use is a bar because I think that's probably the least likely to get in the way of a user or username. And I'm going to name this liked by. Now let's take a look at the result and see what we get. Oops, see if we messed something up. There we go, misspelled separator. Brilliant. Okay, so head over into the browser. Okay, cool. So now we see I've only liked the first article, but now we can see that we've got 2 records here with the bar separating. Perfect. So this is obviously not very scalable in terms of if you had millions of users and say, 1,000 liked it, you would get a very, very long string back here. So this is really only for, it could probably handle quite a few, but I'm not sort of thinking in terms of it being scalable up to a large amount. There's probably a better way to structure this query in terms of scalability. So you might want to go ahead and look that up and see how you can improve this query. So now that we've got that, how do we actually get, we don't want to output to the user Billy bar Alex because that just looks silly. We want to output it within our unordered list. So let's go ahead and start to modify what we need to do. I'll leave this printed out here just so we can see what we're doing. We already know that we have a count, so I'm going to just quickly go in and echo out article liked. I think we called it liked. Oh no, likes. Likes. So now we have an actual count down here. 1 people like this, 2 people like this. You can fix the grammar as I've already said. And now we want to actually do this unordered list. So we need a quick if statement because we obviously need to check whether there actually are any records in here. In fact, let's get rid of that for now. Actually, let's do what we need to do up here. So we're printing out the articles. Let's make a modification to this articles array. And I'm going to say row liked by, which is here, this row liked by. I want to replace this with something. So I'm just going to assign something else to it. So I'm going to say if there are records in here, because this query will return, this will return here. This will return null if there are no users that have liked anything. So if there have been some users liked something, we want to explode. I'm just going to say otherwise empty array. Now inside of the explode we need to pass 2 parameters. One, what we want to explode by, which is obviously a bar. This basically takes a string, by the way, and splits it up into an array. And because we have no spaces in here, that's really important that you don't add a space here or here. We are just basically going to get a list of the usernames. So we're going to pass in row liked by. So now let's take a look at what we get. There we go. So we've got liked by, which is now an array because we've replaced it within that while loop. And we've got 0 and we've got 1 here and the same here. So however many have liked it. Let's just remove this record for 3 just so we can see how that looks. So for article, I think it's here, for article 3, let's just get rid of that record and let's see how this looks. There we go. So we've got an empty array basically, which is what we wanted, and that was placed in there, remember. Okay, so now we can do the if statement down here to actually output. So let's do a PHP, and we need to check if this liked by array is empty or not. So oops, we'll say if not empty, article liked by, then we can just end that if just down there. So end if. Cool. So here we're going to output names. We'll just say that for now. So down here then it says output names, but here it doesn't because no people have liked it or no one's liked it. So here we need to do an unordered list. This can be absolutely anything you want, obviously. In my case it's just going to be an unordered list just because it's easier to visualize. And in here we need a for each loop because we're looping over the array of users. So we're going to say for each article liked by as user. And then down here we'll end that for each loop. And in here we'll create our list item. So the list item is just basically going to echo out user because for each one of these it's just the username as we saw here. Okay, so let's give this a refresh, and there we go. We've got Billy and Alex like this, and no one has liked that. So let's get rid of this because we don't need it. And there is the final result. We have the ability to like something, only once, remember, and only if that particular item exists. It could be an article or something else. And we get to see how many people have liked something. And then we get to see a list of who has liked something. And for each one, we're trying to be as efficient as I can possibly write queries by selecting everything we need within one query. And then when we insert, we're doing that all within one query. So that's how we create a basic like button with PHP.